Modern gaming is trash? Games aren't fun anymore? Gollum literally killed the entire industry? If you have watched any kind of video game related content on YouTube in the past year, you have likely seen one of these types of videos recommended to you. Obviously, the games industry has issues, there's no doubt about that. If there weren't any legitimate things to complain about, I don't believe these videos would exist, or at least there would be far fewer of them. However, corporate greed isn't a new thing, and as long as that exists, there are going to be problems. Do you want to know why companies keep making shitty live service games despite the fact they fall flat on their face more often than not? Well, consider the fact that live service games don't need to launch as a complete package. Production costs for video games have ballooned for the past 20 years or so. Imagine yourself as the CEO of some massive gaming company. You want to prove to your shareholders that you are capable of expanding the company's reach and strengthening its name with some new IPs. You could make a brand new full-price game that's not part of an already existing series, but that's basically the corporate equivalent of having casual unprotected sex.
I just move shit with my freaking mind!
Sure, if things go really well, you could make a new great friend. However, there are far more opportunities for things to go completely south, so it may not exactly be a risk worth taking. Bigger investments need a bigger guarantee of profits, and unless your studio is already a household name, a new AAA IP is a huge risk. With live service games, there's a bit more protection. These games do not need to be a complete package upon release, as it is understood new content will be continuously added. So, even if the game turns out to be a flop, it's less likely to turn into a disastrous situation for the company, as the project was simply cheaper to produce. However, there is one thing that makes live service games very appealing to produce. If the game somehow turns out to be a success, you're going to be swimming in metric shit tons of cash. These titles have the potential to be massive revenue streams for pretty low costs. It's very much the classic minimize costs and maximize profits. Trust me, there's a reason why there hasn't been a new Grand Theft Auto for over 10 years, and it isn't just because of the monumental amount of time and effort that goes into developing those games. So yes, in some aspects the games industry is worse than it was before. For the past several years, as games have been made with increasingly gargantuan budgets, companies are only willing to appeal to very broad demographics. If you want to make a huge game, it has to be as safe of a product as possible. This is no longer the PS2 era where 3D games were still fairly young and big companies were more willing to throw shit at the wall to see what sticks. In fact, some genres have become worse over time. I could make an entire video about how the racing game genre has stagnated to an embarrassing extent, but RaceVic already sort of made that video. I pretty much agree with everything in it. However, all this doom and gloom doesn't give the full picture. Let's just name a few games that were released this year. The Dead Space remake, Hi-Fi Rush, the Resident Evil 4 remake, Baldur's Gate 3, Armored Core 6, Alan Wake 2, Super Mario Bros. Wonder, Lies of P, Wolong Fallen Dynasty. This is somehow only a fraction of what came out this year, but they're all noteworthy releases. I can't even say I'm necessarily a huge fan of every single game I just listed, but they all have at least a pretty positive reception. Anyway, one important thing that all these games have in common is a sense of direction. With the exception of maybe Baldur's Gate 3, none of the games I listed are particularly huge. They're not trying to compete with Rockstar on how much they can spend on the intricacies of horseballs. Instead, these games focus on doing a few things as well as they can. One of the reasons I appreciate Armored Core 6 as much as I do is thanks to how unapologetically arcadey it feels. It's not a game trying to promise the world, but some over-the-top mecha chaos and customization with some intriguing narrative themes. Perhaps publishers are starting to realize more and more that they should be investing in smaller scale projects. Not every game needs to be an open world mechanical shitfest that replaces actual game design with suggestions from focus tests. It's almost like genres exist for a reason. The more you try to appeal to everyone, the more likely you appeal to no one. I can say with confidence that 2023 is up there as one of the better years I have experienced for games. There are still a decent number of titles from this year I want to check out, but don't really have the time to. That's a nice problem to have. Of course, this year has its fair share of stinkers as well, but don't let that distract you from the fact that you have so many goddamn options. I can guarantee you there's at least a few games that came out this year that you will thoroughly enjoy. I mean, hell, the fact that I can carry the vast majority of my game library on a Steam Deck alone makes modern gaming worth it. As a kid, I dreamed of playing games such as Mirror's Edge on a handheld device, and now I can. It's genuinely pretty insane how many game files I can keep in one place thanks to advancements in emulation and less console-exclusive games. Let's not pretend that older games didn't have problems. Shovelware was very common. It still is today, but there are also far more games being made thanks to the barrier of entry for game development being lower than ever. You don't need to know low-level programming in order to develop games. There are many tools out there to help you start putting your ideas together in a playable form. A lot of critique has been aimed toward the modern practices of DLC and game patches, but I don't believe these things are inherently bad. I hate the patch it later mindset as much as anyone else, but when push comes to shove, I'd rather a game release in a broken state to get fixed up later instead of not getting fixed at all. Let's keep in mind that buggy and unoptimized games were not invented yesterday. If Sonic 06 were to release today, there's a chance it could become an okay game eventually with numerous official patches. The fan-made Project 06 is somewhat evidence of that. It's worth noting that without patches, some games would never get the recognition they have today. Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines didn't launch in a very good state. Of course, it didn't help that Half-Life 2 was released on the same day, but Bloodlines was considered very much unfinished when Activision forced it out the door. If it wasn't for a community effort to patch the game, it likely would never realize its full potential. In fact, the community patch is so essential that it's included with the GOG version of the game. On the other hand, we have fighting games. When you bought one of these, all the characters and stages included were all you were going to get. If you wanted more, well, guess you better pay for an entire game again when they release an updated Super Extreme Edition. With DLC being common now, companies can't really get away with that business model anymore. The consumer very much knows they're getting ripped off if they have to pay for an entirely new game. Please don't misunderstand me, I don't think anyone should excuse a game that's a broken mess at launch. I'll always call those games out, and I try not to spend my money on them. However, I don't believe that patches and DLC themselves are the core problem here. It almost always comes down to corporate greed at the end of the day. I can't say I'm surprised to see a game launch a mess when it's developed by a team consisting of hundreds, if not thousands of people on a strict deadline. How do you effectively manage that? The answer is that you can't. You either take a decade to make a gargantuan game or have it release unfinished. One of the biggest issues with the industry today is that the modern super expensive AAA game is simply unsustainable. This has become a talking point again with the recent Insomniac leak. Spider-Man 2 had an insane development budget of $315 million. That's more expensive than most Hollywood blockbusters. I don't even want to imagine how much money is going into GTA 6. I'm not saying you can't ever have these huge spectacle games, but perhaps the industry should take things back a notch, and I think that might already be starting to take effect. See, if you start developing a AAA game now, it's not going to get released until the next generation of consoles. There's even a chance it could also skip the next generation of consoles as well. Yeah, that's a problem that has to be addressed, and that's one of the things I liked about this year. Not every game felt like it had to be the biggest thing ever. It's okay to target a niche and just make a fun game. Not everything has to be some massive tech demo. If you're constantly looking to play the biggest games the industry has to offer, I'm not super surprised if you don't find games as fun as you used to. Of course, there's a variety of reasons why that might be the case. However, if games don't seem fun to you anymore, I highly recommend checking out titles a bit outside of your comfort zone. If you're burned out on competitive shooters, why not give Street Fighter 6 a try? Tired of big, empty, open world games? Why not give Lies of P a try? If I completely disliked modern gaming, I probably wouldn't talk about games nearly as much as I do. While I heavily critique the games industry, I've had some of the most fun playing games in recent years. Modern gaming has a lot of positive things going for it, and many questionable things going against it. To say it's one thing or the other is inaccurate. Just think, in about 10 or 15 years' time, we're going to have people looking back at this year as the golden age for gaming. They're going to think their games are awful and want to go back. Fun times! Remember, if you stop having fun, it's okay to take a break. Thanks for watching. If you somehow made it all the way to the end, please consider subscribing and hitting the bell icon. Hope you beautiful people have a good day.